hadn't met on the battlefield, she'd no doubt seen the news and read the reports of what he'd done while out of control. Deep down, part of Ivan had expected her to be waiting as Lodestar, ready to ambush him and drag him back to Rookstone. "Glad to be me," Ivan replied. He finally extricated himself from Penelope and Helen, and then reached into his back pocket. "And that reminds me, I brought gifts. One for you, Penelope, and a matching one for your mommy." Ivan plunked a small necklace into Penelope's hands, enjoying the sight as her eyes grew wide with wonder before handing a larger version to Helen. "Thank you, Uncle Ivan. Why don't you go try it on in the bathroom, and then you can come show us how you look?" Helen suggested. The words were barely out of her mouth before Penelope was off like a shot, moving at the speed only Midas and children could manage. With her daughter gone, Helen's face turned skeptical as she looked at Ivan. "Spill it. What are these?" "Hers is a shielding charm that Arcanicus whipped up," Ivan said. "It will give her some protection if she's attacked and set off a beacon if she's put in real danger. I had him key it carefully to make sure some kid pushing her down on the swings wouldn't set it off, so it reacts to the attacker's power and intention. Also comes with a minor compulsion enchantment to make sure she always wants to wear it. My kids got similar presents yesterday. And is mine a shield too?" Helen chuckled at that. The mere idea of her needing protection magic was beyond laughable. So far as anyone knew, while Lodestar could be beaten, even knocked out, nothing had ever managed to permanently kill her. "No, we know how magic works around you. Yours is just a piece of jewelry." Ivan pulled another object from his pockets, a dark case that he offered to Helen. "These, however, are something special." Helen accepted the case and gently pushed it open, revealing a pair of thickly rimmed glasses. "Oh my, these take me back. I haven't worn a pair of glasses since the early days, when I was still worried about people connecting me with the glowing woman in the sky." "Were you feeling nostalgic?" "A touch," Ivan admitted, "but that pair is something Wade whipped up special. If you'd be willing to humor me for just a moment, please try them on." Helen looked a bit uncertain as she pulled the glasses from the case and slipped them onto her face. There was no distortion around her eyes, as the lenses were there purely for show. No part of Lodestar, or the woman who hosted her power, was weak or lacking. Once she was done getting the glasses into place, Ivan continued the explanation. "Feel the small indentation on right side near the lens. Press it down for 3 seconds." Helen complied, and at the end of the 3rd second, a shimmer surrounded her. When it cleared, he was once more staring at the Helen he'd known for the past few years, aged past that fateful day when she was 19 years old. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and gasped, then whirled around to face Ivan. "This is too much. A miniature holographic projector like this probably cost in the millions. Only if you pay retail and don't have a friend who spent a few weeks making the technology more cost-efficient," he assured her. "And what use would giving it back serve? Do you think there's someone else who wants to look like you?" Ivan quickly realized how that sounded, and began to hurriedly backpedal. "I mean, certainly countless women would like to look like you, but would you want them to? Not that we're mass-producing these or it's fine, Ivan. I got the gist of what you were going for," Helen said. "But I'm not sure I should accept this. I had a long talk with Penelope the night after the battle, and I'm not going to hide who I am from her anymore. She knows the truth now, and she'll grow up with the mother she actually has rather than who I wanted to be." She started to take the glasses off, but Ivan stopped her. "I'm not telling you to wear them around Penelope, or when to wear them off. But the illusion might come in handy if you want to take a normal job again, or meet with her teachers, or do anything that revolves around not always looking 19. That's why there's an on/off switch. There's also a dial on the bottom that will move your age up and down. It's just a tool, one to help you have a small piece of the normal life you lost." "Thank you, Ivan." Helen adjusted the glasses slightly, then pressed the button again until the illusion vanished. "You know you don't owe me this, though, don't you? What happened wasn't your fault. Sooner or later, I was always going to have to come back. But if I hadn't lost control, it might not have been so soon," Ivan whispered, turning his face from hers. "None of that, now. What you thought happened. I don't know that I'd have behaved any better, and I don't have that thing inside me. The Aussie isn't even trying to press charges for the murder of Blunderbuss. You were a victim of Apollo and Balaam, just like the rest of the city." Helen gently took his face in her hands and turned it so that they were looking into each other's eyes. "I wouldn't lie to you about this. If I thought you were responsible, you know I'd have to bring you in. Trust me, Ivan. Trust my judgment and my actions. Don't let this eat you up inside." "Even if I wanted to, I don't have the luxury," Ivan said. "Too many people counting on me, a meta daughter not the least among them. That's what the necklaces and glasses are, officially anyway. Thank you, Gifts, for agreeing to teach Beth. Then you really shouldn't have. Even if you hadn't done so much for us, I'd still consider it a pleasure, Helen said. Truthfully, it's gotten me thinking that maybe the Aussie needs to offer a more detached training system, something for metahumans that want to get control but don't necessarily want to be superheroes. Especially for younger people. Something funded and helped by the Aussie but remaining legally unaffiliated, so that no one would need to worry about getting recruited. Hey now, keep thinking like that and you're going to dry up all the recruits from our pool, Ivan told her. Helen's face turned serious, and she glanced down the hall to make certain Penelope hadn't returned yet. I know you're kidding, but you need to understand that things have changed. You all got away with a lot of stuff while Professor Quantum and I were on our sabbaticals, but all that came to an end 3 days ago. Your internal revolution spilled onto the streets, and while I'll own that some of ours helped cause it, that means we have to fix our system as well as yours. With Lodestar back, I'm sure we'll be needed less, Ivan replied. But don't expect us to suddenly stop existing. If anything, what happened proved the need for our organization. You saw what happens when meta-criminals aren't properly disciplined and the upstarts aren't quelled. There's a meta-ecosystem, and we play a part in it whether the Aussie likes it or not. The sound of Penelope's feet racing back down the hall forced them to pull apart, only now realizing how close they'd allowed themselves to stand. I can't protect you, Ivan. Not from the law. If you all slip out of line, you'll be on your own. That's perfectly all right. We can protect ourselves, Ivan assured her. So if the Aussie decides to make a real move, tell them to bring the best they've got. Wade has already prepared a slew of slander and harassment lawsuits based on what we endured this time around. The law cuts both ways. Why do I put up with you again? Because once two people have beaten the living hell out of one another then helped save the world together, there's a bit of a bond there. Ivan got in the last words as Penelope came rocketing around the corner, showing off her new piece of jewelry that she'd finally managed to get fastened around her neck. Even if she hadn't appeared, neither would have said the real reason they put up with one another. Some words were just too dangerous to speak, for the ones uttering them as much as the ones listening. What do you think? Beverly spread her arms out, gesturing to the open-concept living room housed by brick walls and a kitchen that was almost as big as Ivan's. From her vantage point in the doorway, Tori could already see into one of the bedrooms, which did look sizable and had more brick walls inside. It had taken several hours to get an appointment with the property manager, and Tori was half convinced that Beverly had ended up employing threats, so she'd been expecting something amazing. This was less than opulent. Well, I like the location. We're in the heart of what's left of downtown, so that will be cool when it's fixed up, Tori said, trying to be positive. But it's the 4th floor and a walk-up, which is going to get really old when we're lugging in groceries. The warehouse decor isn't bad. Little more modern than I like, but I can deal. My main problem is that it's really pricey, and even with a 3rd bedroom to use as a lab, splitting the rent 2 ways might get taxing. Oh, that 3rd bedroom isn't for you, Beverly said. But you do have a lab. This place has personal underground parking garages, surrounded by concrete, inaccessible except through the building, and up to spec for retrofitting with lab equipment. I ran it by the council, and they're willing to purchase and renovate 3 of them to give you the space you need as part of our home loss compensation. That's actually a perfect fit for what I need. She looked at the apartment with fresh eyes, imagining being able to escape to a new subterranean layer at the end of each day. Bonus, if the guild was paying for it, that meant they could have more cash for rent. But there was still no sense in spending money they didn't have to. Are there no 2 bedrooms we can see for a cheaper rate? Not many. This place took some damage, so space is limited, Beverly explained. Besides, I thought maybe we could put someone else in the 3rd bedroom. Split rent and bills 3 ways, if you're into it. Who? Chloe. Her place got pretty much torched in the fire. She's been crashing with some friends, but it doesn't sound comfortable. I mentioned I was apartment hunting for us, so she asked me to keep an eye out for any studios that might be in her price range, Beverly said. This seemed like a better option all around. Is she okay with our affiliation? Tori knew that Chloe was now informed about their membership in a guild of villains and that she'd evidently had taken the news well, but there was a big jump between acceptance and wanting to bunk with confirmed criminals. I floated the idea past her, no promises made, and she seemed excited about it. Beverly walked over to the living area, looking out to see the bustling streets below them. We can find another place if you want. It's just that I've always lived with a lot of family nearby. Moving to the guild was scary, but there were always others around. I thought it might be nice to have 3 of us starting out together, sort of a support net in case we need it. Tori ducked into the nearest bedroom, checking out the size and closet space before noting the private bathroom. The next room was roughly the same, as was the next. Though their shapes were a bit different, the sizes seemed consistent. Well, that was one fight they didn't need to have, at least. A private attached bathroom for every occupant. That's pretty swanky, Tori said. It looks like you put a lot of thought into this place, and they have a lab, so why the hell not? If nothing else, I know Chloe can make a good pot of coffee every morning. Just one thing, though, what's the policy on renovations? I thought you might ask that, so I checked, Beverly said. Upgrades are fine, as long as you don't knock out any walls. So much for the indoor tennis court, but I think I can make it work. Tori wrapped her arm around Beverly's shoulders and steered her toward the door. Come on, let's go try and terrify a property manager into giving us cheaper rent before we sign the lease. See, this is why you need roommates, Beverly said as they stepped through the door. There's nothing like teamwork for properly instilling fear in someone's heart. Nexus stood on the roof of the building where Beverly and Tori were currently heading down the stairs. His attention was not on them but on the bustle of people moving through the streets of downtown, some cleaning, some commuting, some taking pictures for their online lives. It was a curious sight, which was why he bothered showing up for it. This was not the first world where Fornax was stopped, the riots halted, and Balam punished. But it had sustained far less damage than almost any other in the process. The Aussie still stood, the guild was more than a cemetery, and Ridge City wasn't razed to the ground. Many universes were reeling by this point, destined for years of struggle before any sense of peace reasserted itself. Of course, in the realities that did find their way onto this path, it wasn't like the show was over. Quite the contrary, really. Like here, the tension simmered beneath the surface. Instead of an all-out war, these tended to have smaller skirmishes, at least until the tension reached its breaking point. Then things got interesting. Nexus was quite pleased that this, one of his favorite dimensions, had happened upon the more interesting course of events. If it had ended in the more common way, there would have been a great spectacle and then lots of boredom. This way, he was going to be treated to a much more fascinating turn of events, one he'd possibly never seen before. It would take time, but things were going to get very interesting again. Soon, the old grudges and locked away secrets would come rising to the surface, and when they did, he'd have an excellent vantage point to watch from. All he had to do was be patient. And perhaps cause a little mischief of his own when the occasion demanded. After all, the most fun part of all shows was being allowed a little participation from time to time. But for now, the world was boring, and there were other universes to watch. One of which was especially entertaining. 3 of him were already there, but more would soon join. That little gem was too special to miss even the smallest bit of, one of those rarest of instances that required careful observation. In a far-off world, history had been made. For the first time in all of the multiverse, someone had successfully killed a lodestar. End of book. 1 Other novels by Drew Hayes. About the author. Drew Hayes is an author from Texas who has now found time and gumption to publish a few Prologue. Would you hurry up already? I'm not missing this because you couldn't be bothered to leave the lab. Chloe and I will go up to the roof without you. Tori let out a long, exasperated breath and cursed her past self's naivete. When she'd been setting up her new lab, tucked away in what was supposed to be 3 underground personal parking garages, which had undergone serious reconstruction and retrofitting beneath her apartment building, the idea of an intercom had seemed like a stroke of brilliance. This way, Chloe and Beverly could easily reach her if something important came up without having to run down and potentially alert Tori's security system. Only after everything was put in place did it occur to her that perhaps she should have put in a function to mute them when the need arose. Dropping her tools onto her workbench, Tori walked over to the intercom and held down the formerly white button, stained now with grease and oil from the week she'd spent toiling away down in her lair. I'm almost done. Chill the hell out. It's not even supposed to start until 9. That's Nobody can be sure exactly when they'll arrive. Personally, Tori had her doubts about such a statement. While it was true that the local news had been reporting on the impending phenomenon for the last 2 weeks, ever since someone at the Alliance of Heroic Champions first noticed the anomaly, many people had actually known about it several days prior to the announcement. Dr. Mechanical had sent out an email to all the scattered guild members, which self-deleted immediately after being read, cautioning them to the impending threat. Well, perhaps less cautioning, and more telling them to make sure to stay out of whatever it was that went down. There were more than a few guild of villainous Reformation members who couldn't resist a good slugfest, and this sure as hell had the potential to be one. Still, no one, at least no one still with the guild after Balong's uprising, was going to disobey a direct order from Dr. Mechanical. He'd given the alert, and the arrival time, well before the Capes had even admitted to knowing anything was going on. If he said they'd get here at 9, Tori was inclined to believe him. Give me 5 more minutes. I'm working on something special. Tori released the button and turned her attention back to her current project. For once, it wasn't the pieces of a red and black metasuit splayed out on the giant workstation she'd set up in her first few days here. That was an ongoing project, one that would never truly be completed, though she had managed to finish an overhaul and upgrade along with all the repairs it had needed after the city-wide brawl. No, for now, her attention was on 3 sets of what had once been welder's goggles, though they were barely recognizable as such under all the gadgetry and tech Tori had added to them. Much as Beverly might complain, she'd see it was a worthwhile use of time when Tori brought the ocular bad boys back to the apartment. These sorts of shows didn't come along very often, and she wanted to see every last detail. Besides, this project had made for a nice diversion, something to take her mind off what was coming. Exciting as the night's festivities would be, they had nothing on what was coming over the weekend. Now that was something to be on time for. Much as Ivan would have preferred to be with his children, Janet and her husband Juan had taken them out of the city, a decision that Ivan wholeheartedly endorsed. He had ample confidence in the Aussie, especially now that Lodestar was once more at her post, but that didn't mean things still couldn't go sideways without warning. Better his children be far from the danger, somewhere away from all the chaos and madness of things to come. It had been hard enough to accept his youngest, Beth, acquiring metahuman abilities. The last thing he needed was her brother Rick ending up in the same boat. Instead of watching the show at his townhouse, a poor replacement for the suburban home that was still being rebuilt, Ivan had taken advantage of his decades-old friendship with a billionaire and decided to watch from Wade Wyatt's downtown penthouse. This was partially because Wade always kept high-end food a mere phone call away, but also due to a lingering sense of worry. If something bad did happen, he'd prefer to have his old friend, Dr. Mechanical, at his side. Between the two of them, they could easily make the difference in a fight, should the need arise. While it was hardly an ideal situation, especially for a pair of semi-retired supervillains, the fact remained that they lived on this planet just as much as everyone else. A threat to Earth was a threat to their home, and they were not men who took such dangers kindly. Ivan, please calm down. I can see you gripping the armrest of that chair. Any moment now you'll snap it clean off, and it was made custom for this apartment. Wade dropped down next to Ivan, staring out one of the floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped around his entire penthouse. They, like Wade himself, were deceptive in appearance. Each was fitted with a wide array of technological marvels, allowing them to zoom like a lens, go dark, serve as television screens, withstand a rocket launcher, and probably do all manner of other tricks Ivan had yet to witness. As for Wade, he seemed as unworried as usual, relaxing in khakis and a polo, his thinning copper hair unstyled. The gentle smile Wade wore almost hid the brilliance of the mind behind it, that of the genius inventor who had won infamy as Dr. Mechanical, the man in the metasuit that was powerful enough to challenge all but the strongest of capes. That was a long time ago, however. Nowadays, he was merely a billionaire tech mogul who led a secret guild of villains who worked smarter than the common criminal. Perhaps things hadn't changed as much as Ivan thought. Sorry. Ivan released his grip on the armrest. There were finger indents still visible in the leather. The timing just has me worried. We've kept our heads down for months, and now, suddenly, days before we're about to put things back in order, this happens. The timing just seems suspicious. Come on, Ivan. You've been around long enough to know how these things go, Wade replied. Where metahumans are concerned, events and forces tend to pile together. Confluences are the best example, but they're far from the only one. Hell, it happens to regular people, too. Where do you think the saying when it rains, it pours comes from? I still don't like it. Ivan reached over to the table and helped himself to a handful of grilled shrimp. Wade had called up quite a spread for just the two of them. Then again, given how much Ivan had stress-eaten already, he might have gotten the exact right amount of food. That was Wade, brilliant and calculating, down to the last detail. Oddly, that thought made Ivan feel better. If the smartest person he knew wasn't worried about tonight, then maybe it was okay to relax. What you don't like is being on the sidelines, Wade told him. Tori pulled you back in, and now you're hankering to throw some punches and make your strength known. Even if you know you aren't needed, you'd still prefer to be active than to watch from a luxury suite. Much as Ivan wanted to deny that possibility, he couldn't. Wade was right. He'd gone back into battle, had remembered what it was like to be his full self for the first time in years, and now he was having to shake the craving all over again, like a relapsing addict. There's nothing to worry about. The Aussie is doing a full court press, a real show of force. After Apollo's attempted revolt and the ensuing fight with us, they're all over this sort of PR opportunity. Wade reached out and helped himself to a crab cake from the pile on a nearby table. And even if that weren't true, Lodestar is going to be there. Do I really need to remind you that she's more than enough to handle nearly any threat? Add in Professor Quantum being back and Quorum getting off the sidelines, and the fight almost seems unfair. Those three, the Champions Congress, overseers of the Aussie, were indeed a team that was not to be tested. Ivan knew it well, he'd experienced it firsthand. All the same, he'd feel much better when this evening was said and done. Until then, he tried to force himself to relax and focus on the food. And that about wraps things up. Though he groaned inwardly, Cyber Geek merely smiled for the cameras as Hat Trick posed next to the would-be muggers, bound now in the multicolored scarves she'd summoned from her sleeves. Hat Trick, Lucy, when she was out of costume, was kind, dedicated, brave, and trustworthy. Cyber Geek, Donald, when he didn't have to dress up like the superhero he still sometimes felt he wasn't, valued her as a teammate and liked her as a friend. However, she was an adamant fan of putting puns in her banter, and no amount of gentle coaching or careful suggestion would deter her from making those quips. At least there weren't many reporters out tonight. They, like most of Ridge City, were busy covering the much bigger news, eyes to the sky, waiting with bated breath to see how things played out. For his part, Donald would have loved to be watching things unfold with the rest of the citizens. But he wasn't a citizen. He was Cyber Geek, superhero of the Alliance of Heroic Champions, and that meant there was work to be done. With all the big names and powerful capes occupied by the impending event, it had fallen to the newer recruits to make sure the streets stayed safe tonight. More than a few crooks had gotten the idea to take advantage of the distraction and pull off some capers. Already Cyber Geek and Hat Trick had foiled 3 muggings, 2 robberies, and a drunken man trying to make love to a post box. Medley and Cold Shoulder, the other 2 members of their team also known as Ren and Irene when out of costume, were a few blocks over, busting up a bar brawl. That wouldn't take long. One look at Medley and everyone sober enough to process fear would stop short. A living chimera composed of over a half-dozen animals, including a tiger-like head, scales, fur, claws, and a sharp tail, Medley was a walking reminder that natural human defenses weren't at the top of the food chain. Cold Shoulder, with her ice powers, was equally dangerous, though she didn't look it. Cyber Geek pitied the poor bastard who tried to take a swing at her. Cold Shoulder was a big fan of shock and awe. Originally, they had planned to work the night as a team, but the need for capes had forced them to split off and spread themselves thin. Cyber Geek was shocked at how much crime there was. He'd lived in Ridge City all his life and had thought of it as one of the safest towns in existence. Maybe it was the excitement, or the fear, about what was coming. Maybe the whispers he'd heard in the Aussie halls were true, and that guild they fought had kept the low-level crooks too scared to cause much trouble. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter, not tonight. What counted was keeping people safe, just like the stronger capes would be doing in the sky. Still, it was a pity. If he'd been given the choice, been allowed to exist as Donald rather than Cyber Geek for the evening, he might have tried to watch things unfold with Tori. They hadn't gotten to talk much over the last few weeks, with Donald getting more responsibility from the Aussie and Tori being promoted out of her intern-level work. Keeping connections with normal people was more difficult than he'd expected, but he wanted to keep trying all the same. Important as Cyber Geek was, he couldn't let Donald fade away completely. Static buzzed in his ear communicators as new orders came in. Someone was trying to break into an antique store 10 blocks away. Hat Trick nodded. She'd heard the same thing he had, and, with a quick throw of her arm, sent another multicolored scarf shooting out from her sleeve. The fabric wrapped itself around a nearby building's ledge, and just like that, she was off, swinging through the air. There were plenty of people who'd have thought finding an enchanted starter magician's kit made for Elaine power, but Hat Trick had managed to prove she could be just as useful as someone like Medley, even if she lacked the brute force. For his travel, Cyber Geek reached into the digital display he now always had with him and pulled out a gigantic blue boot large enough for a human to stand inside. It was an item from Jump Jump Jones, a video game from childhood that offered some strange, but useful, travel options. Getting inside the boot, Cyber Geek launched up from the ground, easily clearing 20 feet in the first bound, before landing unharmed on the street below. There were more efficient ways to travel, when the need was dire, but he discovered that few things made the same impression on criminals as a massive shoe dropping down from the sky. After all, Cold Shoulder didn't have a patent on shock and awe. Chloe and Beverly were already on the roof by the time Tori sprinted through the door, 3 sets of goggles hanging on her arm. From the top of their apartment building, they could see the other nearby roofs crowded with dozens of watchers using telescopes and cameras. Luckily, most of the people who lived in their building were the type to prefer viewing live news footage rather than standing in the slightly chilly late summer air. That left the trio alone, which was how they preferred it anyway. About time. You know it's 5 minutes to 9, Beverly chastised. She was tall, with piercing green eyes that shifted color when Beverly turned into one of her several dragon forms. Of course, when that was the case, she went by Bahamut, as no villain worth their salt used their own name in a caper. Yeah, I cut it close, but at least I brought party favors. Tori held up the goggles, handing a pair each to Beverly and Chloe, keeping a set for herself. I'll be the one to ask, what the heck are these? Chloe turned them over in her pale hands before slipping the goggles past her short, bleached white hair and onto her face. She looked a tad like an elf who'd gotten really into steampunk as she twisted and turned, staring up at the night sky. Tori walked over and gently lifted Chloe's hand up to the side of the goggles, where a dial could be felt. Specialized watching devices. I figured we'd want to get a great view of the show. If you tweak this part here, you should be able to adjust the scope and focus of your lenses. Don't worry about glares from the ships or powers. I added enough neutralizing light filters that you could chart the stars at noon. Actually, daytime sky gazing might be a fun use for these. Moving Chloe's finger across the dial, Tori heard her roommate gasp in surprise as the stars above them came into sharp focus. Holy shit. Now I feel bad about yelling at you to hurry. Beverly had donned her own pair after watching the demonstration and was currently looking up into the night. These are awesome. Apology accepted, because hell yes, they are. Tori slipped on her own goggles, but didn't zoom in just yet. Despite her faith in Dr. Mechanical's calculations, the location of arrival could shift slightly in response to the Aussie's presence, so she wanted to keep a wide view until then. We'll be able to see the purple in Lodestar's eyes with these. Before anyone could question the truth of that statement, it happened. The ship burst into view above Ridge City, clearly alien from the first glance. It was oddly shaped in such a way that looking at it too long made Tori's head start to hurt, but it wasn't as large as she'd been expecting. Maybe that was why it had managed to get this close before being noticed. All around them, in the streets and on the rooftops, people yelped in excitement and pointed to the sky. Even in Ridge City, visitors from outer space were not a common occurrence. It had been over a decade since the attempted Cernovian invasion, and at least 5 years since the cape known as Crespris arrived, fleeing his doomed planet. In the time since, they had yet to encounter any more alien presences, until the ship had been seen barreling toward Earth. Tori was about to adjust her dial, but paused just long enough to check her watch first. 9 on the dot. Dr. Mechanical had been right yet again, not that she was surprised. Her respect for the legendary tech-based villain was second only to that for Ivan, the man who had once been feared across the world as the monstrous Fornax. That respect came not from admiration at what he'd built, though, but rather from the mentor he'd been to her when she first joined the guild. Ivan had done his best to shape her education and keep her alive. Without him, she might never have become the metasuit-wearing villain known as Hephaestus. And now, she was getting the chance to watch someone Ivan respected, and feared, in action. Twisting her dial, Tori searched the skies for the signature glow of the world's most powerful cape. The GRZ Xenilton ship broke easily through the atmosphere, and the city below came into view. From behind the seat, the pilot could hear its navigator listing off information about the elements in the air. They'd have to do some extensive testing first, but remote scouts had indicated that this place might be perfect for terraforming. True, it would wipe out the native inhabitants, however, that was of little concern. These strange creatures with their vulnerable skin and primitive minds, they couldn't even travel between the stars. Cleansing them would be a kindness, really, saving them from their own ignorance. It happened suddenly and with almost no warning, save for the streak of light that shot up from the ground below. The entire ship halted in midair, sending the pilot flailing. It grabbed onto the console with its tentacles in an effort to stay balanced. If they hadn't slowed in preparation for landing, such a violent stop would have turned it and the crew into pulp on the nearest wall. The others were already scrambling, trying to understand what could have stopped them so instantly. It should have been impossible, but perhaps the native creatures had better defenses than they'd expected. The large screen at the front of the room lit up with a new image, one much smaller than the picture of the ground below. Floating in the sky, glowing like the heart of a star, was a female creature similar to the native animals the GRZ Xenilton probes had reported in early scouting endeavors. Except that species didn't fly, or glow, or stop entire spaceships with a single one of their 5-digited tentacles. Hands, these creatures called them. But of course, that was impossible. Even the mighty Rexran warriors, renowned for their raw power, couldn't halt an entire ship in midair. It was some sort of technology, that was the only explanation. Hi there. She spoke in odd noises, yet moments later, the proper grunts and gloomfest reached the pilot's ears. My name is Lodestar. I hope this translator is working right. Crespris said your ship was GRZZ Nilton and tried to whip something up so we could talk. Crespris. A Paldamayan name, yet there were no more Paldamayans in the universe. They'd been wiped out, a necessary stepping stone on the road to others' progress. Was this creature lying, or had some truly escaped? Anyway, I wanted to let you know that this is Earth, and if you've come here seeking safety, peace, trade, or any sort of diplomatic relations, we welcome you with open arms. Should that be the case, we'd be happy to escort you to a safe landing site and open discussions. As the Earth native spoke, more of her kind came into view.